Colleges leading the recovery in our communities. Our second webinar is a panel session chaired by ColegauCymru Chief Executive Iestyn Davies, who will be joined by Emsi's Managing Director Andy Durman and college principals to discuss the implications of the insights presented in the first session and how colleges across Wales can lead their local communities out of the crisis.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Emsi and ColegauCymru conference series. My name is John Gray, Director of Further Education at Emsi. I'm delighted to be joined by a great panel of guests today for our second webinar in our series, which will be led by Iestyn Davies, Chief Executive of ColegauCymru. Before I hand over to Iestyn to introduce the panel, if you have any questions in today's session, please add them in the question panel in your chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll try to get some of those at the end of today's session. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Iestyn, and please enjoy the session today.
Well, diolch yn fawr, John. Good morning, everybody. Croeso. This is, as you heard, the second of a series of 4 webinars. I've learned a brand new Welsh language word for those of you who are Welsh learners or Welsh speakers. And the Welsh word for webinar is gweminar. So I think I'm going to use the word gweminar from now on. It sounds much more fun. Not quite as much fun Andy Durman has popped ping the Welsh word for microwave. Well, croeso I bawb. Special warm welcome to this virtual meeting in Wales to Andy and the team from Emsi. Around the virtual seminar table this morning, or gweminar table, we have Dr. Barry Walters from Pembrokeshire College, Karen Phillips, as many I'm sure you'll know, is the Chief Exec of ColegauCymru, and actually the newbie around the Principals Forum table, which is Jana Williams, recently appointed. Jana, it seems like a long time now. A lot has happened in the number of months you've been with us, but Jana is the Chief Exec of Coleg Cambria. So croeso mawr chi gyd, welcome to you all, and hopefully we've all had opportunity to reflect on the real 4-course meal of data and information we received earlier this week and had a chance to digest it now. And a picture being presented of a very changing and a very dynamic economic and obviously a social and cultural environment because of the real forced changes brought on us around COVID-19. But of course, as we heard earlier this week, the prevailing economic and social and technological changes that have been going on for some time are also driving change and then impacting the life and experience of you as colleges, but also more particularly of your learners, your students, and the businesses and the communities they represent. So it's in the backdrop of that data we are going to have a look at the key questions perhaps that are facing chief execs and senior leaders and college management, and hopefully then from that give you as panelists and also obviously as people participating in this webinar an opportunity to reflect on that for curriculum planning and adjustments to how programs and SSAs are being delivered. So let's crack on, and I'm going to go to Jana in the first instance. Jana, if I may, and what do you see are the key challenges facing your individual college at this point in time?
Thank you, Iestyn. I think our current challenges are probably around the uncertainties and the lack of clarity in some cases as well, in terms of expectation for our students, that lack of clarity for our employers in terms of what they need in their future planning, from upskilling through to apprentices as well. So I think where organisations like ourselves are used to kind of constant change and constantly responding, that's fine. But I think in the outskirts, the areas who we work with who are not used to that, that's quite challenging. So I think things such as award bodies are finding something which traditionally is very structured and now is having to change in year, quite challenging. The knock-on effect for us is that. And that means for us the considerations about recruitment throughout the year, from apprentices through to our new intake of 16-year-olds, but also where our students go to when they leave as well. So that planning for progression for our students, and whether we set that up or whether because of the potential lack of jobs out there, or whether we work close with organisations we haven't before to help that progression as well. So I would just say uncertainty and lack of clarity are our real challenges at the moment.
Barry, as well as obviously a chief exec of a regional college in Pembrokeshire. You're also the lead chief exec for a work-based learning consortium. Do you see there are any different challenges facing FE as opposed to the kind of the work-based learning delivery model that you also lead on?
Yeah, thank you, Iestyn. Yeah, absolutely. In response to this question, I jotted down a couple of things. From an FE perspective, to me, we've got a huge challenge in keeping learners engaged. And the reason for that is, as like many colleges, we've sort of changed our delivery mechanism to be part remote and part face-to-face. Well, we've probably gone a little bit further than most colleges, and we only have students in 1 day a week, and everything else is live online learning. So we restricted the sort of footfall to about 25% of the normal footfall. This is the way we think we can manage it and manage the hopefully non-spread of the virus in this college campus. It does have a knock-on effect, though. We know that FE learners are different to school learners. School learners are in full-time. Some learners want full-time face-to-face. Some of the lower-level craft learners are struggling to stay engaged. So, we like every other college in Wales, we've issued laptops to learners, and they're accessing their learning from home. If they can't because of connectivity issues, they are entitled to come into college and use our large open area directed study area to learn. But the important thing is that we engage these people and we don't lose them, they don't become disengaged. So that is one real challenge from an FE perspective. You mentioned the alternative mechanism for education and training through the apprenticeship scheme. That has been very challenging. Talking before coming on, and Karen was referencing the number of learners who've been furloughed, apprentices been furloughed. We don't really know where we're going with those candidates. And knowing how many of them will have a job at the end of it all is also a real concern. But again, likewise, like the FE sector, we're using digital technology to support. You cannot operate in the same way as face-to-face, but it is an alternative mechanism for keeping in touch, supporting learners, putting the underpinning knowledge in, and trying to help keep them on track. If I can just say the final thing in terms of a challenge that I think we're facing is providing industry-related training, which has dropped right off, and providing the support for businesses whom we work with throughout the years. Through lockdown, that has been a really challenging issue for us, but we do see it as a fundamental part of our role going forward, and no doubt this will come up later in the discussion, I would imagine.
Diolch, Barry. Karen, ColegauCymru, as the name suggests, is a college that serves some of the communities in Wales that have already over the last decades been impacted by deindustrialisation, technological change, now obviously the challenge of decarbonisation, and have a very, very strange relationship, from the valleys communities into the growing city of Cardiff. Are there any particular challenges that you can identify from ColegauCymru?
Well, I think I would agree with Jana and Barry about the challenges they've already outlined. There's, of course, the ongoing disruption to learning when we have self-isolation protocols, which, of course, are for everyone's safety, but that can mean that groups of learners at any one time are taken out of college for 2 weeks. And whilst in subjects that are easily taught remotely, learning can carry on, where they're very practical in nature, that means missing out workshop sessions. But I think one of the things I would highlight is that the change that this has meant for our staff. Our staff have had to work in a very different way. First of all, with 2 days notice in March, and then, of course, we spent the summer trying to prepare for a different way of delivery from September. And I must say, they've been absolutely magnificent, but it has meant an awful lot of upskilling. It has meant changing the method of delivery dramatically. But I think one of the things I'm really pleased about is that, having surveyed learners and staff, the majority of them are really glad to be back on campus in learning. Like Barry and Jana, they're not on campus full time, but they're very relieved that their learning is continuing, and staff are enjoying being back in work, albeit that we're at a 2-metre distance from each other all of the time.
I said last night on social media, I think the FE response to COVID has been really significant. It's been something that stands out and marks the culture of not just leadership and management, but also all the lecturers and teaching and learning that we have going on in FE. And I've been really proud, I must admit, of the way that FE has responded to COVID-19. So Karen, thinking about the changes that's meant to your delivery of 1920 into 2021. If I had been a previous learning income and suddenly came back today, you know, to recommence some learning, what would I see that's different in your provision compared to, say, 18 months ago?
Well, probably they're only on campus 2/3 of the time and they're learning remotely. Lots of the social spaces have had to change because we can't have areas in the college where people congregate. So they will have seen a lot of change. But one thing I wanted to say, linked to what you were just saying, is we've always been known as the can-do sector. And I think that this time we've surpassed ourselves. Our staff have embraced the challenges we've got and they're helping the learners adjust. Even though it's different, it is still high quality learning. And I think that, you know, because we are very practical in nature, FE colleges, often many of our staff have come from industry, doing the risk assessments, looking at what is possible rather than being constrained by what's impossible, has meant that quality of delivery is still carried on. So we have a range of learners, some who would like to be at home more because of, you know, they can have a lie-in, they don't have to get on the bus, these sorts of things, and some who would like to be on campus all of the time. But by and large, I think we're able to satisfy most of them.
And Jana, how has the impact on employers being managed, and how do you intend managing the impact on employers? I know many of your programs are very much embedded with rather, you know, large sort of embedded companies such as Airbus. How have they adapted to the change, and how has that influenced your program planning?
I think someone like Airbus, who have had to make redundancies, but still recognise the investment in a supply chain of apprentices coming through. So instead of cancelling the apprentices, they've not done that at all. They've just changed the delivery method. So instead of their apprentices being on site, maybe year 3 or year 4, we're delivering to them. We deliver to them throughout a lot of the summer as well. But also, instead of doing a large recruitment push in September, we've moved that to January, for example. So I think in some cases, well, in many cases, we're not seeing employers reducing their appetite for apprenticeships. They're either delaying it or thinking in other ways of how they can still bring on those apprentices as well. I think we will see some changes in newer organisations wanting apprentices that didn't before, and potentially, I suppose, industries that have been significantly hit by COVID, coming out of it with more people needing training up. Hospitality industry could be a good example, where we know people have left the hospitality industry because maybe the food manufacturing industry has been more attractive to them, and the jobs are there. And the likelihood is they won't go back to the hospitality industry, which is where we'll need to see those apprentices come back in again. And I think also our students, we see where maybe students would have gone on higher level VOC qualifications or apprentices, are considering just coming back, going to do A-levels. So already inquiries now are, well, should I just sort of do A-levels and therefore when everything stabilises in 2 years decide what I'm going to do, rather than jump in now into industry and maybe an apprenticeship and go that way. So I think while we talk about these uncertainties, I think with students there are uncertainties, but I still see a lot of employers looking to want to train and want to build for the future, but more cautiously and probably with more entry points than they've had before.
And Barry, what kind of change in demand are you seeing from people who perhaps want to retrain, the kind of people that Jana has mentioned, who have been displaced in one industry sector or perceive it as being quite vulnerable? Have you seen any significant change in demand for retraining?
That's really interesting, Iestyn, because you know, Jana mentioned tourism. Obviously, Pembrokeshire is built on the tourism industry, and you know it is having a battering at the moment. There's no doubt about that. But at the moment, we haven't seen that demand for retraining and upskilling. And in fact, we've actually delayed a great deal of our part-time provision now to a January start. So we're not just sitting back and watching the horizon here. We're actually trying to be proactive now. So we're part of an energy forum group that's recently been established to look at retraining and upskilling people with the skills to work in the marine energy sector. You're obviously aware there's significant potential developments in relation to floating wind, tidal, green or blue energy now, as it's referred to, and the opportunities for employment that will come from this. So we're trying to be a little bit creative on that front and look to set up training opportunities. The problem is, of course, we've got a major shutdown coming in the refinery, which also will have an impact in terms of pulling people in. But those tend to be people from the outside coming into the area, doing the job and then disappearing again. What I'm really concerned about is that we've got job opportunities for people who are based down here in the southwest. I think, we were talking before coming on about the promotion of things like personal learning accounts. I think there's more needs to be done in that area to flag up what opportunities there are and how they will make a difference. Interestingly, again, touching on what Jana said, we're not seeing a decline in the apprenticeship startup situation. We had a lot of Business Wales Skills gateway referrals over the summer period, but a lot of them were caveated with subject to employer incentive schemes. Of course, those employer incentive schemes have now been made public and are now being promoted. So I think the apprenticeship side of things, we seem to be on track, on profile, but it is the sort of part-time upskilling, retraining of those people who are losing their jobs or about to lose their employment that we're really trying to focus in on.
Karen, the FE funding allocation is now, and has been for a few years, being built on a concept of demographic growth and demographic shift. Are you seeing a change in the demographic profile in ColegauCymru?
No, I think that if we look at our full-time recruitment for September 2020, it's very similar to September 2019. It was something we weren't sure about over the summer, particularly as we were all recruiting and enrolling online. So it's very difficult to get a feel for how many learners are going to come through the door. But no, we haven't seen a big difference. Where we have seen a difference is professional courses and increased demand. So maybe professionals wanting to have higher qualifications to make them more employable. And like Barry mentions, with personal learning accounts, we'd sort of anticipated that now we would have high demand as some people coming out of furlough and into redundancy would be wanting to retrain. But of course, the extension of furlough has meant that that hasn't happened. But no, in terms of demographics, in our area, it's largely the same.
And what about the kind of the demographic changes in your flows? Karen, you're in a more traditional sort of school sixth form FE area. Jana, you at ColegauCymru a few years ago now opened up D-Side 6, and that's an initiative, Barry, that obviously you've had something similar. And dare I say to everybody who's listening and watching this webinar, we know some of the history of the tensions around post-16 academic provision in Pembrokeshire, as indeed happens elsewhere. I'm really interested in the impact of GCSE predicted and CAG grades, centre assessed grades. Has that in your colleges impacted the choices people are making between academic and vocational programs? Is it too early to discern? And perhaps even, do you anticipate maybe some people switching from academic to vocational programs as we come to the end of term one? So a very general question there to each of you. So I don't know who would like to have a go at answering that first, but I'll go back to Karen because I know we've talked about demographic. See any shifts between GCSE and A-level choices?
I think we didn't see a massive influx into our A-level centre as a result of the GCSE grades, because we've got a very, very robust recruitment process, which involves interviewing and making sure the subject choices blend with each other. So we didn't have a rush in of people saying, well, now I want to do A-levels because I've got these grades. And often with an A-level programme, you would be looking for people with higher grades to go on to an A level. I think a 5C grade GCSE profile would struggle with A levels. I think that in some areas we've had lots more level 1 learners or level 2 learners, which should be entry 3 and level 1, but of course they've got the grades. So we are having to put on additional support for those learners. But I don't think we've seen, I mean, we will find this out as the year unfolds. I don't think we've seen massive discrepancies in learners' abilities and the grades that they got at GCSE.
Jana, is that similar? Your D-Side 6 venture has been very successful. It's helped really strengthen, I would suggest, the wider post-16 provision in the northeast of Wales. Are you also seeing interest from across the border in your ColegauCymru offer that also has to be accommodated in terms of demographic?
Yeah, we've seen a growth in student numbers this year. We're over target by the amount of students who have come. Similar to Karen, nothing in the sense of there's a swing one way or the other in terms of result of grades. And actually, it's interesting how maybe we spent a lot of time over years and developed a lot of assessment protocol on GCSE grades equals your ability to perform at the next level. And what we've encouraged our staff to do even more is take a very personalised view of each individual learning ability. So really focus on those individual support needs, which we've always done, but the lack of reliance on maybe the GCSEs in the way they were assessed previously to the way they are now has made us have to look at all the real intricate things the students got and move them forward based on that and really support them. Once they're on our programme, our aim is to make them achieve to their very best potential. And it's about how we work with them on that. And I think you're right, the outcome in maybe a year or 2 years of these students will be really, really interesting. We've probably seen a growth in level 1, and I would hope that's down to maybe less students feeling that they failed a lot of things. They actually achieved more than they've ever achieved, and it motivated them to think they would come and continue to study and do something after school as well. So I don't think we've seen that growth necessarily in A levels. We've seen more A level students, but we've seen more students across the whole college site. I think it's forced us to look even more at individual learning. I think that's a positive thing, actually, personalised learning.
But Barry, think about personalised learning and managing, individuals with aspirations, goals, dreams. Sometimes they have the appropriate understanding of their ability and the best direction of their next steps in terms of coming to college. Curriculum planning, SSAs, LAPs, they can all be about numbers and average values and program values here, then, there. How do you, as a college leader, ensure your senior staff, your managers, and your lecturers actually really drill down and double down on the human element? Ultimately, numbers on a spreadsheet is not what FE is about. It's about individual lives and opportunities. How do you get that balance between responsiveness to individual learners and actually planning effectively, thinking about what is in very changing times?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Iestyn, because it is a challenge. You've got a youngster coming in wanting to follow a particular route. There's nothing you can do to persuade that person that isn't right for them. You need to be doing something else. And by that, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fixation with some people on following A levels when we know that perhaps it's not quite the right route for them. I know you've asked me a question about planning, but can I just go back and pick up on the previous question which you asked Jana and Karen, because I think for us it's slightly different. We've found, right, that we've got more level 3 provision this year than we've had previously, so we've had to kind of quickly readjust our plan to accommodate more level 3 learners, and we're having fewer level 1 and level 2 courses, which may be a reflection of the CAG system, which potentially will be an issue down the line if we have got learners who are following provision that is too academically challenging for them. So I think we're very, very carefully monitoring the progress of learners on all courses as a consequence of that. But can I just pick up on demographic, because we've got quite an interesting situation here. Now, we hit the bottom of our U-shaped curve in terms of demographic year 11 leavers about 2 years ago. So in 2019, we had about a 5% increase on 16-year-olds coming out of schools. And then in March 2020, a further 6%. So you're looking probably at something like 120, 130 more year 11 leavers this year than we had 2 years ago. So we've planned accordingly. And yet we're slightly above our target, but we'd increase our numbers just by holding our market share. But we think there's a real gap, and we think we have got a significant number of learners who've finished their education in March, because that's when everything came to a halt, and I'm not re-engaged. So we're working hard with various agencies locally to try to target these youngsters and get them back into some kind of education and training. We think there's a significant number out there. And we're starting full-time courses now in November, and we're looking to put some on in January as well, because we think we've got to get these learners back and engaged in learning, or these young people, I should say, because otherwise they're potentially a bit of a lost generation here. Yeah. And then the second thing with demographics in Pembrokeshire, we've got a really interesting situation here where estate agents have been inundated with requests for house purchases, people moving out from urban areas. Look, we moved into a remote working environment. Everybody can work from home. And people are beginning to realize that, I can sell my large property or whatever in this urban area and move to a rural location, and I can still do my job. So Pembrokeshire is actually potentially going to change its demographic, both age-wise and in terms of social demographic. We're now getting people moving in here who are in employment with young families. That hasn't happened before. And I think there is potentially, as I said, an age and social demographic change on the way. But to come back to your question, sorry, Iestyn, which was about planning, it's very, very challenging. We use the Emsi data, but I think Emsi data is going to change as well. And the modelling and the predictions, it's going to look very different. And certainly down here in Pembrokeshire, it's going to look different, especially with the marine energy developments and the focus on engineering. Sorry, long-winded answer.
But... Oh, that's a really, really interesting response there, Barry. And I think it's important. And the principals and other senior managers some 2 years ago who were around the back then it was a proper table in a proper room. It was in Llandrindod, that place we all get sent to every now and then. It's mutually inconvenient for everybody. And I remember when we were first discussing demographic, highlighting the need to have a real rich understanding of demographic, not just a demographic based on age. I'm sure Andy later on will help us understand how we can track that kind of nuance in the figures and data as well, because it's social, it's cultural, it's age, and of course behind it stands the very real differences in people's aspirations, which can often be determined by where they are on various understandings of a social demographic as well. I'm keen, if I may, we seem to have lost Jana. I'm sure we'll be able to get a connection up to ColegauCymru re-established sometime soon. But Karen, one of the things which ColegauCymru is very, very keen to explore, and I touched on some of this earlier in the week regarding understanding the foundational economy, the very human activities that happen and coalesce around any community. We are keen in our policy position that we've just recently agreed with the Principals Forum that we're pushing forward to focus on the human and well-being aspects, particularly the rights of the citizen. How can we support the well-being agenda for the learner? And of course, how can we focus on the needs of the workforce in FE, which is a considerable economic as well as social agent in our communities. And I'm just wondering, have you given some thoughts, Karen, and indeed Barry as well, to how you can establish what we often refer to as a well-being economy? So an economy that has social, cultural, and creates economic good in the wider sense of that phrase, not just economic goods, stuff that Andy and his economic colleagues can count and put a value on, but goods in a real rich sense. How will you be contributing as a college in these difficult times to the well-being economy? I'll go to Karen first, go on.
Both Barry and I were waiting then to see who's the question for. I think it's interesting, isn't it? This is a big conversation. In the original lockdown, which lasted much longer than any of us anticipated, there were some serious losers. And they were often people on 0 hours contracts, casual work, and they found themselves in a really precarious position. And lots of organisations are talking about the need to build back better. Build back better was the theme of this year's CBI conference. So it's something that employers recognise. I think that one of the things we often forget, because we are publicly funded, is we're also quite a major employer in all of the areas where we're based. And so sometimes it's about showing an example as a big employer of how you should treat your staff and your, customers, our learners. And so one of the things that we did was we concentrated very much on the well-being of our workforce and our learners during the first shutdown, and we've carried on that. It's really important that at the end of all of these things are people, and you have to understand the impact on them. You know, for some people, social isolation, for others, fearful of going back to work, others, financial difficulties, because even though we continue to be funded, maybe they had family members who lost their jobs. And I think that it's going to lead to a more responsible society, where we all think that, hang on, everybody needs to be looked after. That's what I hope anyway. And so in some ways, and I think we do this well in FE, it's about educating our learners about how important community is, how important that wider contribution is in whether they're working, whether they're studying, that they've got to think about other people. And I think that, I hope that, you know, there's a vaccine on the horizon. Who knows how long it'll take to get that deployed, but I hope that what we will all learn from what's happened is it's the people that are important, and that's all people. And so it's really important that we build back better.
Yeah. Barry, Wales has taken the view for some time now that all learning pre-16, you know, the GCSE phase key stage 4, 16 to 19 is encapsulated in the concept of the Welsh Baccalaureate. It gets a bad press sometimes, the Welsh Bac, but it does try to capture the more holistic view of the individual learner. Do you think there's a danger that that concept could be lost at the moment? We've had to make some changes to the content of learning programs, particularly in the vocational space. Is there a danger that we could be squeezing out well-being? And if so, how would you make sure it stays within your planning context?
Okay, yeah, and thanks, Iestyn. I'm in danger here of repeating some of what Karen said, so I'll try and focus away from that. But you know, the Wellbeing and Future Generation Act provides a framework really for all of us to work with our student communities to look at you know, improvement in social, economic, cultural, environmental well-being of all. And I think it really does sit at the heart of the FE sector. You know, and I see a well-being economy as an integral part of our reason for existence, if I'm honest. You know, the well-being economy is one that focuses on serving its people, its local and social communities, and that's what I really see part of our core business. You know, we can talk about the offer we provide. You know, we start at year 9 with taster programs. We work with 14 to 16. We work with FE 16 to 19, work-based learning. You know, 16 plus to whatever age. We work in higher education. We work with social and community type courses, which really, if we're totally honest, the sole focus of those is to bring people together and keep them engaged as part of our communities. A couple of things then that perhaps Karen hasn't said, but we piloted the Employment Bureau here. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to try and link, because we're a county that's dominated by micro businesses. We know that micro businesses haven't got the time to go through the advertising process, the interviewing process. They just haven't got the resource. So we developed the Bureau, and the purpose of the Bureau was to put students into contact with these SMEs and trying to take some of the challenges of going through all these processes away from the businesses. We would do all that for them, and then they would come along and they would pick up the learners who've impressed them in the interview process. The Bureau has the purpose of developing CV writing skills, gives a bit of interview technique, you know, the comms, that kind of thing, just to try and help sharpen up young people's approach to applying for a job. But let's be honest, I think the last time it was reported back in, we placed about 700 learners into part-time employment and nearly 200 into full-time employment. So it's a mechanism that works. And what it does, it gives people a sense of purpose. You know, you've got a bit of a job to go to alongside your course. For many of them, it's important in terms of income generation, but it's also a sense of purpose. You know, and part of your well-being, you know, you've got a job, you've got a commitment to a small business to go and work. The other thing I'd like to say, and again, I apologize if I'm now touching on what Karen's already said. You know, we moved to online learning in a matter of a week. We've been delivering online learning for about 10 years, so we had the infrastructure in place and we could do it, and it worked. But it only works if you've got a whole array of support mechanisms in place to work with your learners and your staff to keep them on board. We were doing, like many other colleges, like all colleges, I know I've heard it fed back in various meetings, you know, surveys with our staff, and staff are feeding back that they're feeling low about something, or they suffered a bereavement during lockdown, which had a huge implication when they couldn't share the burden, you know, and talk it through with people. So we recognise that sort of online well-being support was absolutely crucial, both for our staff community and our student community. And then finally, I suppose there are a number of groups in place down here in Pembrokeshire, the Community Wellbeing Resilience Group. We've got a COVID-19 Community Economic Recovery Group, you know, and we're part of those. We work with other representatives from industry, bodies and agencies to try and cater for the best interests and the needs of our local communities.
So, Andy, you've heard there of a hopefully very dynamic, diverse in some instances, but in some areas some very similar challenges facing each of the three very different colleges and the communities they serve. I sometimes feel, and this might be more a reflection about me and my values, perhaps my own prejudices, that, you know, we hear the phrase, don't we? Well, what's the problem? It's the economy, stupid. But, you know, I'd be really inclined to say, actually, the problem is the stupid economy, because an economy that can't cope with an understanding of social, demographic, human elements, and just simply sees people as units of production and units of resource, that's a very stupid way, I would suggest, of understanding the economy. Can labour market intelligence give us the kind of granularity and human interest and human understanding that allows us to go beyond this very binary, you know, X plus Y equals Z kind of understanding of economics?
Yeah, no, interesting. Just checking you can hear me, because I had a few sound problems there. Good stuff. Sorry, guys. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think is really important, and you know, one might look at Emsi as a data company and think we fall into that bracket, but I think there is soul and passion behind that. I promise you, and part of, you know, hopefully what we're doing here collaboratively is about trying to tease a lot of that out. I think to build on what where Karen was going with one of the points, you know, sometimes it takes a bit of a crisis and a disruption like this to actually help us understand what's broken, first of all, that needs to be fixed, but also what we value most, and starting to think a little bit differently about work and where work happens and what work is. And I think one of the things that we've certainly been pressing on is, whilst yes, of course, we want to illuminate what's happening and cut through the noise of, and try and bring us, I suppose, more of an independent view. Of course, the goal is to bring it to you, to bring the colour of the knowledge of your communities, because the data doesn't have all the answers. It's cold. You know, the joy of it is it's cold, it's independent, it's specific, but it's how you guys interpret it and use it that makes the data valuable or not valuable, quite frankly. I think one of the things that we've certainly been pressing on, this is a global thing, certainly led by colleagues in the US, where I think there's a lot of the similar tensions about things, is really about how do we start to go beyond industries, occupations, and thinking of putting things into boxes and think about the labour market in more fluid terms, because that's quite frankly how it really works. You know, to Barry's point about the Bureau, you know, ultimately, and I think this revolution in business, and something I hope we try and practice, and I try and practice as a business leader, is yes, it's about skill sets and necessarily knowledge, but it's also about mindset, attitude, and fit. And you can't. It's really hard to put data on fit, right? You're a cultural fit. It fits. It's a good fit, and I love the idea that we can bring students closer to businesses where that fit can become apparent or not. And we can avoid a whole heap of wasted time and unmet expectations on both sides of the piece. So one of the things that we've been really looking at is trying to think, well, how do we get beneath the headlines, which are important, and actually start to think about the fluidity in the labour market, where you can then bring the person into it as much as the stat. And I think the challenge is helping individuals really truly understand what skill sets and aptitudes they have. And this is really hard because it's becoming highly, you know, Barry talked about personalized learning. This is like truly personalized, not just learning, but career planning and so on and so forth. And so illuminating that skill and aptitude level has been a real big part. And we've done a lot of work to sort of look to the labour market to say, well, come on then, how do you define what you're seeking? And how do we help employers, instead of look for, have you done this job before? Have you got this qualification? Because it worked in the past, so it must work going forward. Is more a case of saying, hey, what skills am I looking for? So when I say I'm seeking someone in a particular role, what actually am I seeking beyond just the job title? And so breaking it down into those constituent parts, and then thinking about how do we empower individuals, whether young people or older people. And I think this is actually a real critical part to helping people already in the workforce work their way through to successful, sustainable careers, is really then recognizing the skills I've built up through my education and learning and bring that through. So how do you use data? You know, data perhaps starts to, if working at a more detailed level, allows you to bring a bit more fluidity and context into the narrative than simply seeing it as binary 1 + 1 = that job.
Fantastic, Andy. And I know Andy and John, you'll be able to take questions and queries offline regarding the Emsi services and how even to make the best of the packages Colin is already subscribing to. But I've noticed, and I'm going to run on a little bit past our finish time, John, if that's okay, because we've got 119 people logged into this webinar, or this webinar, as I learned this morning, and actually the number's increasing. It's actually not decreasing during the hour. We're clearly doing something good. Well, I'm just going to borrow a few minutes if I can, John. Are there any questions coming through in the chat at the moment that we could maybe pick up with the panel?
Yeah, a couple of really good questions. So the first one, is the FE sector actively establishing or identifying new quality standards for remote learning? Is it sufficiently sharing good practice? And if not, how will it do so? Should this be an area of cross-sector working for HE and FE? I think it's a really, really good question given the prominence of online learning now.
A very good question. I'm going to go to Barry on that, because as Barry pointed out, Pembrokeshire College was very much in the vanguard of digital and blended learning in FE. And of course, Barry, we have the Digital 2030 collaboration with JISC and Welsh Government, which is all around standards. How do you see standards informing what staff can do and deliver, and how will that impact on your offer going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question, because yeah, I think we've got a little bit of a journey to go on standards on e-learning. For all of us, we've learned new things since March the 23rd. You know, from some really bizarre situations with some of the classes that have been taking place, to the fact that, you know, we're now very conscious that sometimes we're teaching to our student groups when we can't see them, or we're teaching to the student groups and the parents are sitting in. So there's a whole host of different issues now that we need to take into consideration and plan moving forward. And yes, we do need to sort of identify standards that we can all work towards. You know, we've all got our own protocols and processes to follow with with online learning. But it is very different for many staff who for many years their classroom has been what they have been in total control of. And I don't think it's quite the same anymore. It is a different environment. I tell you what I do see though, Iestyn, is that going forward, we've invested far too much time, effort, resource into a blended learning approach to simply go back to what we were doing before. Moving forward, there will definitely be remote learning as part of our mainstream college curriculum delivery. The percentage of face-to-face to online, I think, needs to be adjusted appropriately at the right time, but it is definitely going to be a feature moving forward. And for us, in a rural location, we're 1 day a week. We've got kids who come in now, they're leaving home at 7 o'clock in the morning. We've extended the college day to try and pack as much face-to-face in the 1 day they're in. So they don't finish till 5, and then they don't get home till gone 7 o'clock again in the evening. So it's a long day for some of these youngsters.
It sounds, John, as if adaptation is going to be key to this process, alongside some professional standards. And I do love the idea of a college now doing bog-off deals, buy one, get one free. Johnny or Janie is watching, and then mum and dad or parents or significant others are also tuning in as well. I must remember to get you to count that on the tour, okay, so I can claim credit for it from the Welsh Government and get it funded twice. John, any more questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple coming through, but probably just time for one more, and then we'll try and answer the others offline. So the next one, are all colleges being encouraged to sign the Sustainable Development Goals Accord, low carbon economy and the social wellbeing economy? How is the language of sustainability finding its way into every course and training programme?
Because I can see Karen's really looking forward to answering this question. I'm going to go to her first, Yana, and then I'm going to come to you, because your operating environment is with industry that's very carbon focused, aeronautics, obviously traditionally, and the automotive demands around sort of over the border into England. So first to Karen, in the very first carbon community that was Cymoedd, the Valleys, what are you doing around really sort of being affirmative about applying sustainable development goals and the principles of ecological and economic development?
I guess that one of the difficulties of COVID and operating in a post-COVID world is lots of the things we gained in terms of sustainability and how we operated as a college have gone backwards, because you've now got things that you throw away. You've had to turn off water fountains, and there's lots of things in the way we're operating as a college, which is disappointing, because we were making massive strides in terms of sustainability, both with how we were building our buildings, how we were operating our buildings. And so there's a need now for us to get back to that. I mean, sustainability is a key part of the curriculum. It's definitely embedded in the Welsh Baccalaureate, so we mustn't forget it. But at the moment, health and safety is sort of trumping sustainability. So if people need disposable masks because that makes them safe, we've got to give them disposable masks. If it's not safe to have water fountains with people touching, hundreds of people touching them, we've got to turn them off. So yes, sustainability is very important, and we need to do some work on this, but at the moment we're concentrating on the pandemic and keeping people safe and keeping infection rates down.
So finally, Yana, colleges as means of helping businesses and industry change and adapt themselves, a whole seminar in that in its own right. But briefly, how do you approach engaging with your businesses and local community and reminding them of the need that we all need to live on this planet, and it's the only one we're going to get, we're not going to get another one?
I think we have the benefit of our students being much more focused on this, probably, which is a positive thing. I think we have to come from two elements, one lifestyle and one future work development as well. So recognising that part of what we have to do is fit that lifestyle. Karen mentioned the masks, and one of the things we made a conscious decision was when we received money to make sure we gave everybody masks. They weren't disposable, they were all material masks, in the sense of, again, reinforcing to students why we were doing those things, and that encouraged them to be involved, but working with employers then to ensure that they meet the needs of what the future is in terms of training. So even if they're additionality to courses, because they're not in the I suppose in the terms of it yet, but also focusing on those students having input, so our student council and our students in the design of information that goes out, reinforcing how they find it really important, because I think employers listening to students is equally as important as us telling them what we think should happen, because they're going to be their next set of employees. So I think it's working on that lifestyle and course development together, and encouraging the employers to see the benefit of the new generation of students who really think it's important themselves.
Well, fantastic, everybody. Really, really good. I just want to thank Barry, Karen and Jana for giving us the view from the Chief Executive's office, and hopefully helping us understand how this is being driven from the very top at the moment, but going to be achieved obviously by full engagement across the curriculum, across the staffing cohorts. I want to thank Andy and John from Emsi. Really, really great to be working with you guys. I've enjoyed every interaction we've had with you, whether that's over the last few years or in particular in the last few months as we've planned these webinars. Remember, John, Gweminar is the Welsh word for webinar.
Yeah,
okay?
Iestyn, can I just jump in very quickly? And I just want to say a big well done to everyone. I think, as you say, you should be rightly proud of how further education has lent in at this challenging time. It's, you know, as an organisation that sits across a lot of different types of sectors, I've been super impressed. You know, relative to what we've seen in other areas. So I just want to say thank you and well done. I just want to offer up a note of encouragement while I've stolen the microphone, if that's all right, which is, I think there's so much more value to bring to the communities that you can. I think you're doing a stellar job in doing what we can see in front of us right now. But I think, you know, what I mentioned, you know, sometimes takes a crisis to see what's important. And I think the reality is, as Duncan set out, you know, the labour market is always being disrupted, right? You know, today's COVID, you know, we've got Brexit, we've got automation, all sorts. And I think if we can use this as an opportunity to create a culture where colleges are seen as that community connector of people to work, to well-being, to community. And I think putting work at the heart of that creates engagement, focus, the opportunity for outcomes. So I just want to encourage you guys to keep leaning into that, and also thinking about the fact that this, you know, there's a lot of challenge and disruption ahead. How do we use this moment to really showcase the value of a college to its community and be at the forefront of that? So I'm just sorry for jumping in there.
You make us blush. So, diolch yn fawr, Andy. Really am gwerthfawrogi. Really appreciate those words of encouragement, and I know that really will sort of percolate down to the staff who are curriculum planning and trying to make sense out of the current crisis. So yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thanks ever so much for being so generous, and to you, John, as well, for your time. So just a final thank you. Diolch yn fawr I chi gyd. Os ydych chi wedi bod yn gwrando neu'n gwylio, os ydych chi wedi bod yn logo mlaen i'r recordiad, if you're watching this on the playback, the recording, thanks ever so much for dipping in. And just remember that if you found this webinar a success, it's all been brought to you by ColegauCymru. If it hasn't been so good, it's been Emsi's fault. See you all soon. Another webinar.